County gubernatorial debate of 2013. My name is Vince Godette. I am the chair of the Carver, there you go. I am the chair of the Carver County Republicans, and I really want to thank not only these candidates for coming out tonight, but you, because you are the ones that are going to be, you the activists, and that's who I consider you to be, are going to be the ones making the decision, making the call to select that candidate to go up against Mark Dayton. So thanks again for coming out tonight. We'll be introducing the candidates shortly, and the panel, of course. Prior to that, though, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mike Fry, and he will lead us in an invocation. And then if you'll stay standing, we'll have our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
Let's all stand, please, as we pray. Lord God, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening. I thank you for everyone's effort to be here, to be involved in the civil matters. And Lord, we're going to be looking at the executive hopefuls coming up here in this next season. And Lord, I just pray as we're here, we're listening, that the candidates will have a clear train of thought as they're expressing their character, their convictions, their beliefs, and Lord, their plans that they have to lead this state that so desperately needs leadership. Lord, I pray that you would have your way here. May there be a spirit of unity, and Lord, may we all go home with an understanding of who to tell, what to tell, and Lord, that you'll guide in the affairs of the things that are going to happen here this evening. We'll give you the glory for what you do, and it's in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ we do pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Mike. You'll stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And before I forget to make this announcement, please turn off those cell phones, and I need to turn mine off too. All right. We have 4 great candidates that are here tonight, and a lot of people will be watching this from afar. So let me, with no further ado, introduce 4 great candidates for governor. I'd be very happy if any of them is in the governor's mansion in about 18 months from now. So, with no further ado, and we didn't have an order for this, so I'm just going to go ahead. Jeff Johnson is our commissioner, former legislative announcer. Thank you. Jeff. Our next candidate, Mr. Dave Thompson, Senator Dave Thompson. Dave, good to see you. Thank you. Next is Mr. Scott Honor. Scott. And we have, finally, Mr. Kurt Zellers, Speaker of the Minnesota House, until about a year ago. At this time, I would like to introduce our our moderator this evening, Mr. Joe McDonald, and he is also Representative Joe McDonald. He will be moderating this evening and introducing the panel to you. Joe. Thank you.
All right, let me know if this is, if you can all hear this, let the technicians adjust the sound accordingly so I don't have to hold this throughout the event. Thank you for coming tonight. As Vince said, a heartfelt thanks for taking time out of your evening to come tonight. As the saying goes, though the world belongs to those who show up, and you showed up. We're all busy in life. We just came from a football game, our son's football game, and I hear several others that are out and about in their activities in life, and you're taking time out of your day to pay attention to what's going on in the politics and in our country and in our state is very important. Carver County Republicans appreciate it. And so really to these gentlemen up here. Welcome, gentlemen. It's good to see you. I'm going to introduce our panelists today that will be asking the questions for this evening. And our first one is Mr. Richard Crawford. He's the editor from the Chanhassen Villager. Please welcome Richard Crawford. Next is Kelly Stiles. She is present. Sight. Very good. My glasses.
Thank you, sir.
Rachel, do you have my reading glasses? I'm at that age. Thank you, Kelly Seitz, who is the president of the Waconia Chamber of Commerce. So please welcome Kelly Seitz. And then finally is Deb McMillan, Director of Government Affairs for the Twin West Chamber of Commerce. Welcome. We're happy that you can be with us tonight. You came in the perfect time.
Thank you.
You know, in 1787, after the closing of the Continental Congress, a reporter asked Dr. Benjamin Franklin this question: well, what did you give us, a republic or a monarchy? To that, I hope you all know the answer. The good doctor said, republic, if you can keep it. I think today we could probably all agree that it seems that our republic is not being kept well. And I think that's why each and every one of you are here tonight. And it's important that you're here because we want to continue to keep our republic. You couldn't hear me. Let that be a lesson. It's from Carver County. McDonald cannot be heard on stage. Well, with that in mind, we have an envelope here that we're going to draw questions for the number and order of which these gentlemen will answer. So with that, I need a volunteer. Let's have Deb, who just got here. Would you draw the... 17 times. Okay, Scott Honor, Mr. Honor will go first. Let's see. Yeah, I guess at my discretion, that would be good. All right. At my discretion, I can decide if we can go from left to right from Scott Honor. Would you have it know it? I'm going to go start from the right and then go left. I think that's good. We'll all appreciate that. So, without any further ado, let's introduce the first question. Oh yes, okay, the timer. Mike Burns. Mike Burns is our timer. He's also a good cousin, and he will be making sure that you're on time and you end on time. It's, your opening statement will be, you're allowed 2 minutes, and then your answer will be 1 minute, and then we'll have a time placard that will go up 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then 0, and if you're not done, you'll get thrown out. Is that right, Mike? 2 exclamation marks. So at this time, let's have an opening statement from Mr. Scott.
Great. Well, thanks for having me here tonight. I'm running for governor because Minnesota is headed in the wrong direction and with the wrong leadership. When I was born in Fridley, my parents are sitting right here, joined us tonight. They lived in a trailer park. I put myself through college, including having a job shoveling horse manure at 5:30 every morning, a skill I'm looking forward to using in the cabinet. And I went on to have a career in business and create financial security for my family. I feel that I've lived the American dream. Jamie and I have 3 young children. I want them to have that same opportunity that I had, and to have it here in Minnesota. But I don't see our state providing that opportunity today. The Minnesota I grew up in is slipping away. In Minnesota today, we rank last in the country in startups. We're chasing taxpayers out of the state to the tune of $1 million of annual income, leaving the state every single day. We rank last in the country in minority graduation rates. We have one of the highest achievement gaps in the country. I think these results are unacceptable. Now, I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman, but I want to get big things done. I'm looking to be a transformational leader. I'll reform regulations. I'll simplify our tax code and reduce tax rates and restore workers' rights to Minnesota in order to ensure that our state leads the region in economic growth and job creation. I'll bring about real education reform and make sure that we reward the best teachers, end outdated union rules, and make sure that we have a system that allows dollars to follow the students, to have our state lead in terms of child readiness to enter a career or go to college. And when I'm done doing these things, I'll bring our state leadership together and turn the state over to the next generation. I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honor. Mr. Zellers, you were next. Representative Zellers, pardon me.
That's better than what you call me on the House floor, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for having us here. Thank you to Carver County and for all the surrounding counties for having us. Like Scott, I'm running for two very important reasons, Reagan and Will. I've watched as our state has come from a great, and not being from Minnesota originally, you know, you get to know the state a lot better than maybe the people who are growing up here. I've come to love every single aspect of Minnesota. But what I've watched, especially over the last 3 years, is Mark Dayton let the state of Minnesota lapse. We're an embarrassment when it comes to tax policy. He's an embarrassment when it comes to how he handles the state. He doesn't even know the bills that he's signing. He says one day he's for a tax, then he says, I wish I could repeal it. And then once he has a chance to repeal it, he says, well, I guess I can't repeal it. I'm running so that Reagan and Will have an opportunity to not only build a business here in Minnesota, to own a business, to work in the business. So when they graduate from college, if they happen to go out of state, if they happen to get a degree or go and get a master's someplace else, that there's an economic opportunity for them back here in Minnesota. In order to beat Mark Dayton, we have to have somebody on the ballot who can go toe-to-toe with him and who's done it and won. When I was Speaker of the House, Governor Dayton came to us and said, we're going to raise taxes. I was elected on that mandate, and that's the way it's going to be. I said to Mark Dayton, with all due respect, Governor, I was elected just like you by the state of Minnesota. Our majority was elected by the state of Minnesota, and we promised the voters we'd balance the budget without raising taxes. At the end of the budget shutdown, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't what we wanted, but we didn't shut down government to pick a fight with Mark Dayton. We shut down government because we knew what it would do to our state's economic freedom and our economic prosperity. If you want a governor who's set toe-to-toe with Mark Dayton, who's led on the important issues, economic competitive, education reform, and reforming the way government treats its business owners, I am gladly going to ask for your support. Thank you again for having us here tonight. It is a pleasure to be here. Look forward to a very lively debate.
Thank you, Kurt. Commissioner Johnson.
All right, well, thank you, and I want to thank you all for being here as well and for everything that you do for those of us who have been on the ballot in the past. I know I wouldn't be there if you weren't doing all that you do. For those of you who I don't know, just a little bit about my background. I grew up in northern Minnesota, as did my wife. We went to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. We live in Plymouth with our two sons. Thor is 15, Rolf is 12. I have spent the majority of my adult life in the private sector, both as an employee and as a self-employed business owner. And during that same time, I served for 6 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and now the last 4.5 years on the Hennepin County Board as the often lone, often loud voice of some level of fiscal sanity in the state's largest county. And I am seeking and will abide by your endorsement for governor of Minnesota. But I want to ask something of you tonight, which I always ask at these forums of Republican activists. I want to ask that you approach tonight just a little bit differently than maybe you had planned. Rather than listening to us just from the standpoint of your role as a Republican activist, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of your neighbors, your independent neighbors, maybe even your DFL neighbors, because we will need some of them to win. Whether we like it or not, we don't have the numbers in Minnesota to win unless we get a big chunk of independents and maybe even a handful of DFLers. And that's not to say that we should compromise on our conservative principles. I've never done that, and I never will. But we can't, as candidates, just talk to ourselves and expect to win a statewide race. We actually have to talk to the majority of Minnesotans who don't consider themselves Republicans. That's how we're going to win. So imagine how your neighbors will respond to each one of us as you listen to us and watch us tonight. Because I believe to win a statewide race, we really need to pick a principled, proven conservative who can present a very clear and positive contrast to Mark Dayton, but who also will be appealable and liked enough by non-Republicans to actually win in this state. Thank you again for everything you do, and I appreciate your support.
Thank you folks for being here. I really do appreciate seeing all of you, because it's going to take a fired up group of people that are willing to put out a lot of effort to beat this governor in November of 2014. I'd like to especially thank my family. My wife Rhonda and my son Phil are here, and I appreciate their support. This does take quite a bit of sacrifice on their part. My daughter is away at college, couldn't be here, but I so much appreciate the support of my family. Now, I think what you're going to hear tonight is that the four of us pretty much agree on an awful lot of the issues. We're going to see things much the same way. So what you really need is to figure out which of us is the person who brings the level of experience necessary, the courage of their convictions, and has the ability to win this election. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about my background, lifelong Minnesotan, and grew up in the Red River Valley, graduated from high school up there, have now been in the Twin Cities for about 29 years, and small business lawyer, had a radio talk show, and was a commentator on AM or on Channel 5 KSTP TV. During that time, I've had the ability to live a good life in the private sector. Didn't run for public office till I was 48 years old, 3 years ago, when I was elected to the Senate. I've been an employee, I've been an employer, I've lived a normal life, as most Minnesotans have, having to make it out there in the private sector. And then 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to run for Senate and learn how our state government works. And I think it's helpful to have that knowledge for someone that heads into the governor's office. So I believe that I have the experience necessary to get this done. I hope that I've demonstrated to you over my 3 years in the Senate that I have the courage of my convictions. I've stood up, I've authored the right to work legislation. I've been leading on repeal of the damaging taxes passed by this governor. I've done the kinds of things I promised you I would do when I ran. And finally, we do need someone who can get the basics inspired, who you will believe will take the oath of office in January of 2015 and do what he or she says they'll do. I think I will do that. I know I will do that, and I think I've proven it. My name is Dave Thompson. I'd be honored to have your endorsement. I will honor that endorsement. If you choose me, I'll work very hard to win. If not, I'll support the candidate who is endorsed. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before we continue on tonight's proceedings, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge those who were responsible for putting this event tonight. And I'd like to introduce Representative Ernie Leidiger. And thank you. Would you stand, please, Representative? And the committee that also put this all together. So Ernie worked very hard, they all worked very hard in preparing tonight. I witnessed this in Norfolk, Virginia, aboard the USS Minnesota submarine as we were getting the tour. And here Ernie was working right next to a nuclear missile, and yet he was on his phone trying to call and make sure that this went off without a hitch tonight. So thank you, Ernie. Well done. He did get a little in trouble from the Admiral of the Navy, but we managed to get him on the plane and back here anyway. So well done. And anyone that has volunteered for a political party, for your candidate, to ensure that we can prosper in Minnesota, would you please stand up? Let's give it of your time, your talents, your wisdom, advice. Please stand up for those who helped out in politics. Yes. So thank you all. All of you are responsible for a while. Any one of these gentlemen will be in office, or myself, or any other candidate. So we thank you so much. And any other members who are holding office today, or in the legislature, would you stand as well? Representative Herthoff is here. Representative Grunhagen is here. Representative Senator is here. Representative Cindy Pugh is here. County commissioners, mayors, I like mayors, and city councils. Thank you for all coming, and thank you for all the work that you do as well for your public service. With that in mind, I'm going to call on Dick Crawford, who will ask the first question for tonight. Dick?
Thank you. I'm going to start with a local question on invasive species. Local units of government have taken various measures to control the spread of aquatic invasive species, particularly zebra mussels, in recent years. Do you think the state should play a larger role in protecting area lakes, or should this be handled more at the local level?
Okay, you heard the question, and we'll start with Mr. Allen.
Well, this is something I think about because I live on Lake Minnetonka, and the zebra mussels appear to be heading to our bay sometime soon. And look, I think it's an example of where the state ought to be refocusing priorities. I'd like to see more state resources working to make this particular issue a higher priority for the state. I mean, we have the resources at the University of Minnesota that can be applied more aggressively here to solve these problems. I think it's an issue that affects our economy because of tourism in the state. And And I'd like to see our state put a higher priority on making sure that the minimal amount of money that can be used to more effectively combat these invasive species is applied.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Honor. Ms. Kirk, you're next.
Sure, and thank you for the question. And actually, a client of mine, when I worked in public relations with BASF, and actually had an aquatic invasive species product that should be used instead of what we traditionally have, which is when you get out of the water, make sure and hold your boat down really, really, really hard. We should be using all assets that are available to us, whether they be natural or whether they be chemical. And we also should take the money. We have dedicated funding right now, whether it's the arts, cultural, humanities money. Instead of buying up more land for the government, we should be using those dollars to spend to take care of the milfoil. The control should stay at the local level. It should be up to the Lake Association membership. But we should be sending those dollars, rather than buying up more land for the government to run or not run or run poorly, we should use those dollars effectively to eliminate the milfoil and all aquatic invasive species, whether it's zebra mussels, milfoil, or some that are coming up the river eventually. But we have the money there, we need to use the resources, but keep the control local.
I think this should be largely a local issue, and this is actually something that we've dealt with to a certain extent on the Hennepin County Board, because Lake Minnetonka is in the county, and we have groups of people within the county who want to spend literally tens of millions of dollars and practically close off that lake. That is not the direction we need to go. Now, I do agree with Kurt that we have legacy funds that are available right now, and if we're going to spend those legacy funds, and we're going to because they're now constitutionally created to be spent, I would rather see that spent on something like aquatic invasive species battling, as opposed to some of the projects that they're funding right now. But when it comes to the actual policy, I think we need to leave it up to the local communities, both the counties and the cities and townships around the state of Minnesota.
I don't think it's unusual to have a state policy set on issues that impact community to community. And clearly, if you have a boat in Lake Marion and Lakeville, and you move it to a lake in another area of Minnesota, and you transfer something on that boat, that is an issue that is a statewide issue. So I don't have a problem with having a statewide kind of standard, but I do believe that the local people should control the enforcement of it, and I don't believe we should spend more money to do it. We should use the resources we have, but we do need to protect our state assets.
Very good. Okay, Gavin, you'll have the next question. Do we have some bill right? Yeah.
Minnesota is a regional outlier with the highest cigarette taxes, highest income tax rate, highest sales tax rate, and second highest corporate tax rate in the 5-state region. Give us the first 3 items on your to-do list for Minnesota to gain its competitive edge.
Thank you. And actually, I introduced the bills during special session. Getting rid of the warehouse tax, first and foremost. It's something that no other state in the country has. Governor Dayton said he thought it was a bad idea, we should repeal it, but then didn't. The sales tax on business-to-business services. So if a tractor breaks down in Fergus Falls, rather than having it fixed outside, say over in Argyle or up in Hallock, they're now taking it across the border into North Dakota to have it fixed over there because there's no sales tax on that service over there. Same thing in Wisconsin, same thing down in Iowa, near the border down there. We should start with those things that are first and foremost make us outliers. Then at a 9.8%, our business tax rate, our corporate tax rate is one of the highest in the country, if not the world. We should start to lower that down. And then lastly, the business property tax is something we introduced not only in the House, Senator Thompson, and they had it in the Senate as well. We should start with making our business taxes lower as well so that when people look across the border, there isn't a 5 or 6 or 10% difference in the amount of property taxes that they pay.
I would say if you're talking about the top 3 things, I don't think we can take little pieces at a time and expect to change Minnesota all that much. So job number 1 has to be tax overhaul. And that would include the corporate tax, that would include the income tax, that would include the sales tax, so that overall we are more competitive with at least the states that surround us. Because right now we are losing our entrepreneurs to Wisconsin and North and South Dakota, and we ought to be stealing their entrepreneurs because we're a better place to live. But our tax climate has made this so uninviting for entrepreneurs. So an overall tax change, an overall overhaul of the tax would be number one. Number two is I talk to small business people. Our workers' comp system in Minnesota is well out of step with the states that surround us. So that has to be job number two. And then for me, number three would be lawsuit reform or tort reform. I carried probably the biggest tort reform, lawsuit reform bill that we've seen in 3 or 4 decades when I was a freshman in the legislature. And we got it done. And it's something that I'm not one who believes that any tort reform makes sense, but there are plenty that do. And that would be job number three for me.
Number one, repeal all of the taxes passed by the Democratic legislature, the governor, this last session. And we're already seeing, we now have the second month in a row, July, where the revenues are coming in under forecast due to the economic slowdown that you're seeing. So number one, repeal those taxes. Number two, get rid of the statewide business property tax. And number three, reduce severely or eliminate income taxes both at the corporate and the personal level, because that's incredibly anti-growth, anti-opportunity. And then the big picture. Looking at the thing from a 30,000-foot level, we need to rework the entire tax code. And what we need to have in mind is lower taxes for sure. That would be a result of less government spending if I'm your governor. And then secondly, we have to look at not using the tax code as a device for social engineering, but using it simply to generate the money necessary to run a limited government with the least possible negative impact on the economy.
You know, I think this is a critical question. In fact, I think it's the issue that will define this race of whether we have a Republican governor or a Democratic governor. I'd actually like to take a little more time on this one as a result. You know, I built a business that bought and fixed 60 companies. When I went to my partners to talk about where would we want to consolidate a business or grow a business, I would have no chance of convincing those partners that the answer should be in Minnesota. And we are not only losing regionally, we're losing nationally. And this will cause us to have an unsustainable future. Now, what would I do? I'd start by reforming regulation. The answer is not just taxes, it's regulation. I talked to a fellow in Prior Lake a few weeks ago who started a new insurance company. The state of Minnesota told him it would take 2 years to get an insurance license. He went to South Dakota and got his license in 2 weeks. He now, of course, headquartered that business in South Dakota. So we have to start with regulatory reform. Then we do have to reform our tax code, but we have to radically simplify and restructure our tax code. That means eliminating loopholes, having a simple code that everyone understands, and reducing and flattening our tax rate. That will make this state competitive. And then we have to bring workers' rights to Minnesota. You know, a couple of years ago, Boeing was looking at relocating a major part of its operations. Minnesota wasn't even on the list of consideration with all the great things we have to offer. Where did they go? South Carolina. Why? It's a right-to-work state. We have to have our state be competitive. And I'll make sure that I apply the skills I developed in business to make that happen.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Kelly, you have the next question.
In our house, we're spending some time thinking about the 100th anniversary of the battle at Gettysburg, or the battles there at Gettysburg. And so we've talked a lot about the divisive nature of what was going on in our country. So this question kind of leads to that, and also just in having conversations with my neighbors and different people. Minnesotans are increasingly frustrated with the lack of good dialogue and compromise that are the hallmarks of meaningful policy making. What is your strategy to overcome that?
Well, I think I encourage people, whenever they're looking at us as candidates, to look at our records. Because I think if you see my record, you'll see that I would take conservative, free market ideas, difficult ones that had opposition from special interest groups, and got it done within divided government. When I was in the Republican House, we had a DFL Senate. And I can give you several examples of that, but the one that is closest to my heart is the eminent domain reform that I was chief author of. That was one of the biggest changes we've made to property rights law in probably the history of the state of Minnesota, and we made it almost impossible for government to take private property through eminent domain for economic development purposes. And I can tell you the groups that were lined up against that were liberal groups and traditionally conservative groups, certain business groups, real estate developers, cities, counties, MnDOT, etc. I went over to the Senate and I found myself an author named Tom Bach, who is now the chief Democrat over in the Senate. And we figured out where we agreed on that issue and we got it done. So I think we can all talk about it, but I'd encourage everyone to look at records to see who can actually make that happen.
You know, there are people that are in a position of leadership, and there are leaders. Leaders have the ability to understand the vision that people are willing to accept and buy into and follow. It would be my goal as governor to attempt to do that. I was in the majority for 2 years and authored legislation that I got Democrats on board with me to work with me. I got the governor to sign legislation to audit the employees, Minnesota public employees' dependents, to make sure they actually were legitimately dependents. A left-wing DFL governor signed that. The auditors indicated that probably in 2012, the taxpayers were saved about $4 million because of that legislation. So you have to be able to do a couple things. Number one, you've got to lead. You've got to find out what the vision of the people is and make your vision consistent with that. Bring them along with you. You have to develop the relationships with people across the aisle and find the ability to work with them. And I think I have the ability to do that. You know, it's kind of funny. We all sometimes get a reputation, well, Thompson is, really principled and doesn't bend. And yet, ironically, I have a lot of legislation that I worked up with the other side, but yet didn't give up on the ideals I believe in.
Well, I'd start by focusing on results, not dollars, when we talk about legislation. I think too often we hear politicians talking about dollars only. The next thing I do is make sure we have a good PR firm working with us, because I think we've done a lousy job of explaining to the public at large what our policies are and why we're looking to implement them. And we'll get the public behind us to get the results that we want, and we'll get Democrats agreeing that we should have better results. We can get better results out of our state government and spend fewer dollars. I know this because we did this in business. Now look, government isn't business, but I would not have been successful in buying and fixing 60 companies and implementing the changes that we had to implement there if I didn't know how to work with someone that might have a different view at the start on how to get something done. I've been effective at working across the aisle and across the table, and I'll apply those skills here to make sure that we get what we need done here in Minnesota.
In my time in politics, I found there are people that are looking to make a name for themselves and people who are looking to get things done. And I think your actions speak louder than your words. Of all the major pieces of legislation I've worked on, and even some really small, minor pieces of legislation, I've got a Democrat author. Whether it was passing life in prison for violent sex offenders, John Lesh is a Democrat from St. Paul, couldn't be further away from me in the political spectrum. He was my co-author because he was a prosecutor. He knew what it would take to get some of the judges, to get some of the law enforcement on board so we could pass the sex offender law. When I passed the hospital for Maple Grove, it wasn't just Maple Grove that was serviced by it. All of North Memorial was all across the state. The ambulance service, the air ambulance, served all of greater Minnesota. Working with greater Minnesota legislators from Duluth, from the Iron Range, knowing how important it would be to have a viable hospital in Maple Grove, as well as in their community, I was able to pass the bill. So I think that's the best way, and at the end of the day, the guy I most want to replace, I got to sign permit reform, education reform, and to repeal the tax. I think it's a pretty good start.
Very good. Well, as you can see, I have a very tough task up here, going from the, of course, left to right. So, Dick, you have the fourth question.
Thank you. I have another tax question. According to an Associated Press report this week, the income gap between the richest 1% and the rest of America last year reached the widest point since the 1920s. And the share held by the top 10% of earners last year reached a record 48.2%. My question is, do you believe tax policy should take into account this disparity?
The answer to the question is no. But I would also like to point out that it's interesting that this income gap widening has occurred under a Democratic administration that has, by and large, gotten their way and taxed America to death. So if, in fact, it were liberal taxation and liberal regulations and liberal economic policy that closed the income gap, then we'd have our income gap closed. But President Barack Obama has done that, has not done that, and neither will Governor Dayton, because the fact of the matter is that that taxation is not beneficial to the economy. Am I suggesting we should do away with all taxes? Of course not. We have to tax in order to fund the legitimate functions of government. So the specific question was, should our tax policy be put in place to try to reduce the income gap? No, our tax code should be used to get the funding necessary to support a minimal government. And if we do that, and we have a prosperous, healthy economy, we will all do better. High tide will raise all boats. Folks, America's not about if you prosper, I lose. It's we all benefit from a healthy, successful economy, and we want people at all levels to improve their lives.
Well, I think we have to focus on how do we help those most in need to have them do better, move people from welfare to work, and have that be what reduces this gap. By the way, there is a tax issue tied here. I think it would be smart to implement an enterprise zone strategy where we create an area in our state where those that are living in the areas performing the poorest have a tax break if they do business there, and that if they work and live in that area, they're not paying taxes, and do something smart that's been proven to work in other areas to improve the outcomes of these people that deserve our help. And if we do that, we'll have this state working well on all levels. We'll help the poor, and we'll help everyone else in this state too.
I believe the old adage, you don't make one man rich by making another man poor. And that's what tax policy has been in the state. That's the division that both Mark Dayton and Barack Obama have created in our country. It's not about we as a nation. It's not about us as Minnesotans helping those in need by helping them get a job. Ask somebody, should we tax a rich guy we don't know or some rich lady from out of state? Sure, go ahead. How about we tax a business owner that owns your small business that has your 12 employees in it? Well, no, I want to keep my job. That's the fundamental conversation that we need to have with Minnesotans. We need to bring Minnesotans together. Focus on our individual excellence. If you don't want to run a company, that's fine. But if you want to work for an entrepreneur because you believe in what she's doing, that should be our focus. Our tax policy shouldn't be based on, let's bring everybody down to the lowest common denominator. There's a name for that. It's called socialism. It doesn't work. Even if Vladimir Putin wants to write at the New York Times, it doesn't work. So our message should be bringing the rest of Minnesotans up, not bringing everybody else down to the same level.
It's not a zero-sum game, and I actually believe our tax structure should be flatter than it is. And I think if you look at history, you will see that it has been when our country has been the most prosperous. And we can actually point to facts. But what we can't do as Republicans is get caught in this trap of letting the Democrats define that argument. So that all we're arguing about is, well, rich already pay their fair share and they have, the top whatever percent pay this percent. Because we can't win that argument in people's hearts and minds, at least not in non-Republicans' hearts and minds. So what we've got to talk about is how improving the economy, how growing the economy is what's really going to help people who need help the most. And the problem is with so many DFL and liberal policies, they claim to be trying to help people, but they're hurting the people that they claim to help. And as you increase taxes and drive people out of the state and drive businesses out of business, who gets hurt the most? It's not rich people. It's the people who need jobs the most. And that's what we need to constantly be talking to Minnesotans about.
Very good. This is almost as challenging as managing my fantasy football leagues. Over here, which number who went first and who's over here next. So I believe our next question is by Deb McMahon.
We've talked a lot tonight about redesigning services and figuring out how to get better outcomes from government. Provide one concrete example of how you would overhaul or redesign a public service that's critical to our economic growth.
I'll give an example. Roads. When I drove to my grandma's house in Richfield as a kid, I drove on the same 494 with the same number of lanes as we have today. And we're behind in developing infrastructure that will help this state build and grow. Instead, what do? We allocate $1.8 billion to the Southwest Light Rail project. We need to reprioritize where we spend money and how we use the state's resources to make sure that we are competing, both regionally and nationally, in a way that is going to provide long-term opportunities here in the state. Road infrastructure is absolutely part of that. It benefits our lives today, and it's the foundation for our future. And I would overall how we prioritize our transportation system and the capital that we're spending on that here in the state.
I'll give you three, two of which we actually got signed into law, one of which it was not. First and foremost was the Sunset Commission. This is a program that was working down in Texas. It's been used in other states where we bring all of the agencies, all the commissions, everybody who's getting money from the state of Minnesota, sends out their budget, and then make them justify it each and every year. If you want to know how good of an idea it was one of the first things that the Democrats repealed once they took over. Second thing is permitting reform. Again, something we got Governor Dayton to sign, and he hasn't repealed yet, but taking it down from unlimited to whenever we get to your permit down to 90 days. The third thing that hasn't been done yet is lean, and that's actually asking government to go through their processes, whether it's back office, whether it's computer purchasing, whether it's how many chairs we buy. I was shocked to find out that we had 36 chairs we offered in Minnesota for our employees. We brought it down to an ungodly 12 and saved millions of dollars. We need to do like the private sector when it comes to purchasing. Those are things that I would work on. Not only have we passed and have become successful, but we'll go back as governor and make sure we advocate for it.
This is my life on the Hennepin County Board. I mean, this is where my focus has been, because we literally have thousands and thousands and thousands of human service programs in Hennepin County, some of which work really well. And this is not rocket science. You measure them. You follow the people who are being served, and you see if their lives are being changed or not. This is such a winning issue for us. I've been talking about, as governor, starting a top-to-bottom audit of the programs that taxpayers fund, and we'll start with human service programs. So when we say we want to move people off of welfare into self-sufficiency, well then let's start measuring those programs and seeing who's actually moved off of welfare into self-sufficiency, not for a month or two, but long-term. And those programs that work, we got to fund those programs because we care about people. And the many that don't work, that we fund because it makes us feel good to fund them, we ought to end those programs. This is a way where we can talk about spending less and being more efficient with money without seeming so cold and calculating, which we always get hit with, because what we're trying to do is fund the programs that actually change people's lives.
The majority of our state budget is spent on a combination of education and human services. Let me give you an example of something I think we ought to do in the human services area to change things. The biggest detriment to our human services budget right now and to the cycle of poverty that we've seen in America for a long, long time is that people don't see a benefit to getting out and working and becoming self-sufficient. So one of the things that I would propose as governor is that we offer people the opportunity to go out and work and supplement any government assistance they may be getting and not take away their benefits dollar for dollar. Remove it fractionally so that they can attach a better life, a benefit, and a sense of self-worth to going out and doing something. So that is just one example, and obviously we do need to review and look at all of the programs to see which ones are working and which ones aren't. But folks, people are economic animals. They do what is in their self-interest. And what is in their self-interest is if they go to work, they improve their lives.
Very good, thank you, gentlemen. Nick, you have the next question. Oh, did I skip you again, Kelly? I'm very sorry. In order of this here, it's confusing. So, Kelly.
No, I've been in your chair there. It's not easy. This next question I will ask, and I also at the end. Well, my question is about mining. What are your thoughts on the mines being proposed and the long wait to permit those mines and get them up and running? Are they an answer to jobs in the Minnesota economy? Many have said that this will result in economic benefit for Minnesota way beyond the Iron Range. How do you balance the benefits and the economic benefits with the environmental impacts? And I'd like to know from each of you, have you been up there?
Yeah, thank you, and it is a great, great question. This is exactly what we need in Minnesota that we are never going to get from Mark Dayton. He is the quintessential 60s liberal environmentalist. He will not open those mines. He's had 3 years to do it. For those of you who haven't been up there, and I have, it's called polymet. It's a copper, nickel, palladium, titanium, non-ferrous mines that folks will make the North Dakota oil fields blush. I'm from there. Trust me, it will be billions of dollars. And it's not just taking the minerals out of the ground. It's the processing. Having a copper spin-off mine up on the Iron Range so the kids who want to stay on the Iron Range or want to even move back to get their engineering degree from the University of Minnesota, they want to go back up there and help with a smart factory. Maybe not the way that their mom or their dad or their uncle worked in a factory, but a smart factory that produces not just the product, but then the spin-off product is critical. Governor Mark Dayton will not approve those permits. Governor Kurt Zeller's will. This is a stark contrast between us. assuming these guys are going to agree, but this is something that we've worked on. We've pushed him while I've been at the Capitol. I will continue to push it. This is our North Dakota oil fields. We need to open them up.
This could be, I agree with what Kurt said, this could be such a renaissance for northeastern and northern Minnesota right now. And it's a typical example of liberal policies that hurt the people they claim to want to help. Because by not allowing these businesses to move forward after literally years and years of study, and more realistically because of a special interest that is concerned about them, the people you're hurting are essentially union workers who desperately need jobs out there. Once again, this is a great example of an issue that we could use so effectively, and we need to talk about it over and over and over again.
I have spoken with the PolyMet folks. I have not been up there yet. That was one of the questions that you asked. Do I believe that that issue has ramifications beyond northeastern Minnesota? Absolutely. If you look at the farm economy, you look at the mining economy, you look at obviously the medical services economy in this state, it all works together to create a healthy economy and an economic engine that benefits us all. With the new technology that we have in this world today, we are able to do these things without doing damage to the economy and without causing any problems for our future and for our children, and we can preserve northeastern Minnesota, which is beautiful, while we do all this. And I would also like to talk about the politics of this because it's very, very important. This is an area where your left-wing radical environmentalists are getting in the way of union employees that want to work. And you might know that in many cases, both those sides tend to represent the opposition. And this is an area where we can, I think, get to some people that need jobs, need work, need prosperity, and win some votes, as well as doing the right thing.
Well, Minnesota's economy was founded on the back of our bountiful natural resources. We have to go back to having a mentality of taking advantage of the things in which we have an advantage. It's a competitive marketplace out there. We have an advantage in natural resources. Now, up north, we absolutely can create jobs, and my family and I, including my parents and my wife and kids, were all camping up on Birch Lake up by Ely a couple of weeks ago, and friends of mine up there gave me a hat that says conservation with common sense. We need more people thinking this way, and we need to do a better job of articulating these issues. You know, when I talk to people around the Twin Cities, most of them don't know a thing about polymer. They have no idea that we have these reserves. We need to do a better job of marketing the very issues that can make this state competitive, and I'll make sure that happens.
Very good. I have a question. The U.S. ranked 17th out of the 50 countries in our education. 17, we are quickly falling behind. Minnesota has some of the greatest education. Our test scores are high amongst our schools. However, our achievement gap is the greatest in the nation in our education. I'd like to hear what your ideas on how we can close that achievement gap and become #1 in the state and continue on in the nation as well.
The education achievement gap, which is the disparity in graduation rates between white students and students of color, as you mentioned, is the worst in the nation. Is one of the 3 issues that I set as my top 3 goals, and I've been talking about throughout the state and will handle as governor. And the reason we haven't made progress on this, because we've been at the bottom of the list for almost 30 years, and we've been wringing our hands about it, and we've been throwing money at it for 3 decades, and we haven't changed a dang thing. Because we've never had a governor, Republican or Democrat, who's truly willing to take that head on. And that's something that I will be willing to do, and it means having probably a rather public battle with both the teachers union and the education establishment about, first, school choice, and second, parental empowerment. And we start looking around the country at states that are doing better than us in their achievement gap, and we start trying what they're trying, whether they're DFL, Democrat policies, or Republican policies. We try them, because I think it's unconscionable that we're willing to give up on, what, 10 to 15% of our kids because of where they live or because of how poor their parents are.
John, I'd like to make this my 2-minute question. If we believe in equality of opportunity, it is completely, we betray it if we don't provide students with a good education and give everybody in the state an opportunity to have access to a high-quality education. I'm the product of public education. I went all the way through the public school system, as did my wife, and as did both of my children. I believe that we have to introduce competition. So 2 things. First, let's talk about competition. We do have charter schools, we do have open enrollment, and those are very good things. But I'm a believer that we have to introduce a tuition tax credit system. And simply stated, that will allow an individual to send his or her child to a school that they have to pay for, but take a tax credit to offset the payment that they have to make. In the event that someone doesn't make enough money that the tax credit benefits them, what states do is they tend to create a fund that allows individuals or businesses to contribute to that fund and help out students that come from families where they can't take advantage of the tuition tax credit. Folks, think about this. If we were to all of a sudden say everybody needs a fast food meal a day and we're going to subsidize a meal at McDonald's at $10 a day, what would happen to Burger King and all the other fast food restaurants? They'd go away. And what would happen eventually to the quality of McDonald's? It would drop. But that's what we do with our schools. It would be insane in the private sector. We would never do that, but that's what we do with our schools. We give them a big subsidy, make it almost impossible for the other schools to compete, and therefore quality drops. Doesn't make them bad people. The vast majority of teachers, by the way, my wife happens to be one, and I know Representative Zeller's wife happens to be one. The vast majority of teachers in this state are wonderful, dedicated people, but if you're not getting results, we need to provide education so that if those results don't happen, parents have an opportunity to get their kids into a school that works. Dollars should follow students, not buildings.
Well, education is another area where we hear politicians talking about dollars, not results. I know we can get better results. Jamie and I support a charter school in North Minneapolis called KIPP, 5th through 8th grade. They operate at a 25% lower budget per student, pay teachers 15% more, and get 2 times better results, test scores out of their students. We need that kind of result in our education system. That means taking on the teachers union, making sure that we're rewarding the best teachers, that we end outdated union rules, that we make sure that parents have choice by offering a system that lets dollars follow the student, taking bloated administrative costs out of those administrative functions and putting that money in the classroom close to the student. I will make this an absolute priority as governor, and I will stand up on those Capitol steps and do what it takes to make sure we get this job done.
I'd like to make this my 2-minute too, Joe. This is something very near and dear. As the senator mentioned, my wife Kim's a full-time teacher in Robbinsdale School District, not one of the greatest school districts in the state. She sees each and every day what happens. For me, it's about educational freedom, not just entrepreneurial opportunity, but it's freedom, the ability to make it in life. The way the system is now, we divide in some of our schools, we divide the room in half. You all don't graduate, I'm sorry, you're going to end up in the system, whether it be social welfare or criminal justice. You over here maybe get to 4-year college, maybe get to a technical school, congratulations, you made it on life. It should be about the economic and personal freedom to choose. My kids and I, my wife again, so Kim's a public school teacher. We send our children to a public charter school. We made the choice based on the curriculum, based on the teachers. Kim went through the curriculum on Wayzata, Robbinsdale, and Maple Grove, and looked at them and said the best choice for Reagan and Will is Beacon Academy. That should be available no matter your zip code, no matter where you live, no matter what economic background you come from, but we can't forget about those that choose not to. As a freshman legislator, my neighbors next door to me were homeschoolers. I introduced a bill that allowed not just if you're going to a public school or a charter school or a private school to deduct some of those costs, but you should be able to deduct the cost of the books that you use in your homeschooling from your taxes as well. You're still paying property taxes, you should have that opportunity. So for me, it's the defining issue for our next generation. We have got to allow kids, no matter where they are, have that opportunity. Because I have been in there, I've met with them, and if you're going to go into a school in Minneapolis and say to African American family, you deserve that same choice. A parent trigger where if the school fails, you as a parent group can say, you know what, we're done with the current administration, we're done with the union, we want opportunity. If I'm going to go to a Monk family over in St. Paul and say, you deserve that same opportunity, I have better walked a mile in their shoes. And I will tell you one thing, if you are a public school teacher who's a conservative Republican and married to me, and you're willing to go to the teacher's lounge and say, school choice is what's best for our family, that's proof in advertising. Kim and I have walked that mile. We will for families all across Minnesota.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, Dick, you have the next question.
Thank you. I have a two-part question on guns. One is I'd like to know what your position is on whether guns should be allowed inside the state capitol. And I'd also like to know if you believe any changes need to be made regarding gun access in Minnesota.
I do believe that guns should be allowed in the state capitol because my belief is that law-abiding non-felons ought to be able to carry firearms unless there is a compelling reason not to. And there certainly isn't a compelling reason not to in the Capitol. And then just empirically, our laws with regard to that have been in place for an awful long time, and I'm not aware of any problems with it. So I see no reason to restrict the carrying of firearms at the Capitol. In terms of any gun laws in Minnesota, I assume the question is asking whether we need gun control laws or any more restrictions on the ability to own, possess, carry guns. Certainly not. I believe that, as I say, individuals, law-abiding citizens, ought to have the right to keep and bear arms, and I would not be proposing or signing any laws restricting that right.
I'm a strong supporter of Second Amendment rights and an NRA member, and I do believe that guns should be allowed in the Capitol. I'll feel safer at my desk in the governor's office knowing that law-abiding citizens are carrying weapons in the Capitol. And I don't think we need to change the state's laws with respect to gun control. We have a system today that has already found a balance. And we should make sure that instead we focus our attention on enforcing our laws, having criminals arrested, having them kept in jail, serving their sentences, reducing crime rates in this state. The issue that we need to focus on is criminal activity, not further gun control.
To your answer, yes. In fact, as Speaker, I had that authority. I made sure that Tony Cornish, retired sheriff, retired police officer, DNR agent, which is code for fish cop, I made sure that Tony was always packing on the floor because I never knew when McDonald was going to get out of line. As far as my rating, I have an A+ rating from the NRA. I've been a member since I was old enough in high school, and I got my hunter safety card. As far as changing the law, I mean, you all know us. None of us are going to be an advocate for more gun control. That's not the issue. That's not what Minnesotans are talking about. When we passed concealed carry, there was all this paranoia and hysteria that as soon as we passed this, there'd be thousands and hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans getting these concealed carry permits. There'd be shootouts down on Hennepin Avenue. It never came to pass, folks. Law-abiding citizens should be allowed to keep and carry arms. And to Scott's point, if they're breaking the law and you're using a gun, throw the book at them. Don't punish those of us who are responsible. Punish the people who commit the crimes. Go get them. Leave the rest of us alone.
You know, part of my job tonight was to distinguish myself from these other guys, but I can't on this one. I think we're in the same place. I certainly don't believe that we ought to be, well, I'm sure you would love that. I don't believe that we should have more restrictions on law-abiding citizens carrying guns, and that seems to always be what gun control is about. It's about restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens. And sometimes when you get into a deep discussion with people who are advocates of gun control, they don't understand the Second Amendment. They honestly think it's about hunting, and it's not. I mean, everybody in here understands that it's not about hunting rights. It's about protecting yourself, not from criminals, but possibly from the government. And a lot of people roll their eyes when you say that because they say, well, that will never happen. But that is the point of the amendment. So we don't need further gun control in Minnesota.
Very good, thank you, gentlemen. Deb, you have the next question.
All right, this is a little wonky. Governor Dayton established a Transportation Finance Advisory Commission to recommend funding and financing Minnesota's transportation needs for the next 20 years. They concluded that to maintain the system's current performance, an additional $21 billion is needed on top of the $39.3 billion that's currently available. To build out a world-class transportation system, the shortfall is in excess of $50 billion, according to this advisory committee. What is your vision of Minnesota's transportation system, and how do you propose funding it?
Well, I would make transportation a high priority for the state, but it starts by taking an in-depth look of where do we sit today, where are the needs, where are the needs based on how our economy is growing, not on how some unelected body thinks we should live our lives. You know, when you have the Met Council putting forth a vision that has us all living in dormitories along a light rail system, well, that's not my vision for what we should be doing, and I want to make sure that we have a smart, thoughtful approach to how we build out road-based infrastructure, and there's certainly a need for expanding and further developing public transportation as well. But I'll get under the covers and figure out what is the smart way to develop transportation. I'll then report that result back to the state so everyone sees it in a transparent way. And then we'll make funding that development a high priority. It should be higher on the priority list. And you know, I want to take all the things that we need to fund and put it in the bucket and then figure out the prioritization.
I'll be a little sarcastic with the question, not the questioner. But let me get this right. A commission that Governor Dayton, who wants to raise taxes, put together an idea that we're billions of dollars behind. Let me guess what the solution would be. A huge tax increase, something called a wheelage fee, and a TAD fee increase. This is a government agency wanting more money. First thing you start with, just like Chris Christie did with that tunnel, you cancel the projects that everybody knows isn't going to work. The light rail line out to Southwest, and I know there may be some in the room that don't like it, but it can't work. It's not going to work. Instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars, bad money after good on that, put it into expanding 494, widening 212. Make our roads the priority. Bus rapid transit is something I've come to actually like and appreciate. In Maple Grove, we have one of the most successful lines that actually makes money or breaks even. Bus rapid transit runs on roads. We can build more roads so those of us who choose not to drive, which is our right, we can then still stay in our car. But those that do want to get on a bus, spend a half an hour reading on the way downtown, like I did, you can have that bus rapid transit. But you cancel the stupid stuff first, put the money into roads.
I would focus transportation dollars in 3 ways. Number one, first focus on the infrastructure we already have, because a lot of it's falling apart. So make sure that it is safe and it's in good repair and it's big enough to deal with the needs of people. Number two, especially in the Twin Cities, but also some of the other population centers, really focus the bonding money on congestion relief and on mobility and on helping people who want to get somewhere as quickly as they possibly can. We seem to focus on things other than congestion all the time. And then number three, in the areas where we do need other modes of transportation, and in the cities, that is true, I would focus as well on buses and bus rapid transit, because that is much, much, much more cost effective than trains. I said before that measuring programs was my life on the Hennepin County Board. Okay, this is my life on the Hennepin County Board, because we are so obsessed with trains, and it's only because we've got this romanticized attitude about them and we're not actually willing to look at the cost-benefit analysis. It's not there.
First off, philosophical approach, transportation should not be used to try to influence or dictate people's behavior. Rather, transportation should be designed and built to facilitate the behavior that people want to engage in. So we have to take a completely different perspective on it than those, as the Mayor Joe Souchere would say, the euphorians who are attempting to dictate your behavior. In terms of how do we pay for it, I said earlier that the human services and the education budget make up the majority of the budget. We can certainly find savings there that we can use to take care of our transportation system. We should discontinue building light rail trains. They are not effective in relieving congestion. They do not work out economically. We should focus on making certain that we have a good highway and freeway infrastructure throughout the state to move individuals and also our commercial commerce as well. Build the roads that we need, build the bridges that we need, relieve the congestion, have a good road infrastructure, stop wasting the money, and use the revenue sources that we have. We do not need additional taxes.
Very good, thank you, gentlemen.
All right. How do you plan to earn the vote of the moderate or independent and DFL Minnesotan?
All right, I think that first and foremost, we have to appeal to them as who we are as Minnesotans. I'm a middle-class dad, coaches his son's baseball team, his football team, which I'm missing tonight, sorry Will, Kim is there with them. But also that we have the ideas that resonate with Minnesotans. It's about their career, not just their job. As a buddy of mine said, I get my kid a job digging ditches. I want to know what you're going to do to make sure he has a job here in Minnesota. We appeal to Minnesotans on the issues that we all care about. Quality education for our kids. Standing up and making sure that the standards our teachers have are the same or better than the principles that they have. Governor Dayton vetoed, or actually I should say that he passed, but is now undoing our teacher requirements for standards. Making sure that a bad teacher is thrown out of a class. Principles he left in place. I wonder if there's a little collusion there, but making sure that we actually have a message that appeals to those independent voters. Your kids want a good school, right? The Reagan rhetorical question. You want a good job. You want your job to stay here, right? Mark Dayton is going to drive your job out of the state with the warehousing tax, without education reform. We've passed those things. I passed those as Speaker. Those are the things I'll fight for as Governor.
I think it's about thinking outside in as a party. And I mentioned in my opening that we can't just be talking to ourselves. And we do that a lot as a party. We sit up here and we kind of know what you want to hear, and so that's what we sometimes tell you. That's not going to get us past 35 to 40%. We've got to do better than that. And it's by thinking outside in. It's by taking our conservative free market principles, and it's by figuring out what people who aren't Republicans are concerned about, and then applying those principles to their concerns. Not saying, these are the three things that are most important to me, and therefore I'm going to try to shove them down your throat by being able to argue philosophically why it's better. It's about looking at them and saying, what do you care about? And then we take our principles and we use them to craft policy. And it also is just about showing up and sitting down with people, whether it's in Minneapolis or whether it's in the western suburbs where we tend to have some problems as Republicans, and finding out what it is you're concerned about and how you think it ought to be addressed.
Why are you here tonight? Because you believe what we believe. You believe that autonomy is important. You believe that being able to pursue your passion and master something and enjoy your life is important. You believe that when you get old and gray, you've got grandchildren, that you want to believe you've had a purpose, and you've lived out your passions, and you lived out your dreams, and you've had an opportunity to do that because of the environment in which you live. But that doesn't just describe this room, that describes every Minnesotan, and I would argue every human being. It's simply a matter of talking to people about what we believe and helping them to understand that the solutions that we have will help us to achieve the things that we all believe in. So when we talk about tuition tax credits, we don't talk about a 7-point plan and who we talked to, what we did. We talk about, do you believe that every child in Minnesota should have access to the American dream through a good education? Everybody believes that. Well, I've got the solution. That's what we're going to talk to about. What do we believe? Because they're with us.
Governor Dayton defines success as growing government. I define success as growing jobs. Minnesotans are going to be in that camp. And Minnesotans are ready for a change in leadership. They're tired of seeing the same people bringing the same solutions and having government get increasingly larger. They're ready to have someone who comes from the outside who will show them what's going on, who will deliver results, who will be transparent in what he's doing. And I know that my agenda of making sure that we lead the region in economic growth and job creation, that we make sure our kids are ready for a career or college, and that we get our state's fiscal house in order are going to be issues that everyone in this state is focused on. They'll get behind me, and we'll win this state back.
Very good, thank you, gentlemen.
There's lots of city and county officials, or several in the audience tonight. Do you think counties and cities are streamlining services effectively, or would you have recommendations on where they could do better?
I think some cities and counties probably are doing it effectively. I think generally the smaller, the more effective has been my experience. But as a Hennepin County Commissioner, I would have to argue that not every county is doing things as effectively and efficiently as we could. And in fact, the biggest problem, I think, with many local governments, especially the really big ones, is that we can't, or we choose not to, prioritize. Everything that comes in front of us is a priority at that particular moment. And we saw it again today on the Hennepin County Board. We had 2 votes that I voted against today, 2 6-to-1 votes that I lost. One of them was on the interchange right next to the Twin Stadium, which is going to be an $85 million project. The Grand Central Station of downtown Minneapolis. Can I use my 2 minutes for this one? Because now I'm just getting started. And I voted against that because it's one of those projects that just continues to grow and grow and grow. And we take more and more property tax dollars for it because it's really cool and it's going to have so many great things, and it's going to be an iconic public space, which means grab your wallet if you're a taxpayer whenever you hear iconic public space. So I voted against that. Minutes later, literally minutes later, we voted on our maximum property tax levy increase of 1% for one of our tax levies, but if you added them all up together, it's about a 2.5% increase because we don't have enough money to do the basics. We don't have enough money to fill the potholes. We don't have enough money to take care of people who need help and are the most vulnerable, and it's because we refuse to prioritize. So I'm sorry, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I have seen this is worse in large local government, I think, than even it is at the state level. But there is room to improve across the board when it comes to prioritizing, when it comes to streamlining, when it comes to deciding what's important and actually doing it as government.
The question is, what is the role of state government in guiding or controlling or regulating local governments? Well, I believe there ought to be a lot of autonomy in local governments, that they ought to pretty much run their own show. I don't believe that just because I was elected in the Senate, I am more intelligent about what is going on in a city or on a school board than someone who was elected to the city council or the school board. And so I believe we ought to allow them to govern themselves. But we then can't ask the state taxpayer from around the entire state to bail them out when they don't do things correctly. And folks, that's how you get responsible local government, is make them bear the consequences of their conduct. And that is an overriding theme in government and in America right now, is we don't make people bear the consequences of their conduct. Whether it's Wall Street bankers with TARP funding bailouts, or it's counties or cities that run their counties or cities into the ground, and we bail them out one way or the other. Give them the autonomy, let them run it, and let them bear the consequences of their decisions.
I read recently that the City of Minneapolis Pension Fund is one of 5 city funds around the country that's most at risk of having the city go bankrupt, like Detroit. So I would say Minneapolis at least doesn't seem to have its act together. Now, as a state, we need to make sure that we're having the state dollars being used for things that state government should be doing. And today we have a system where dollars are raised locally, they're then sent to the state, then sent back to the local government. The state's raising money around the state, those dollars are sent to the local government. This system is convoluted, it makes no sense, it's not transparent. I would significantly overhaul and reduce local government aid and make sure that our state dollars are being used in a way that makes sense for all the citizens in the state.
Well, to your question, I believe the government that governs the closest to the people governs the best. So having those city council members, the county commissioners govern at that local level is the best. Now, the state of Minnesota putting its nose in where it doesn't belong is a constant problem. We actually introduced several bills that actually had to do with giving up a lot of that authority and then letting the locals decide. If you've already upgraded your wastewater treatment facility and you need to build a Main Street road, but those funds are set aside or siloed away, you should be able to make that decision at the local level. Now, you'll live within those means and you'll live with the taxpayers if you funded a road when you should have fixed the wastewater treatment, but I think that's the best way to do it. And then, the idea that Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth need local government aid. And just for those of you who don't know, that's where we take it from those of us in the suburbs and we send it out to Minneapolis, St. Paul. It should go to those local governments. Ely, Minnesota, Watamingo, Crookston, Ada, Argyle, those cities that really don't have the population base. They don't have a Target corporation downtown. They have no tax base to do it. They should get the help they need to fix those basic services, not Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth.
Ladies and gentlemen, I predict that in 2015 the Republicans will win back the House. Would you all agree? And it's no surprise we need each and every one of your time, and your talents, and your treasures to help win back the House and the governor's office. And with that, I'll ask the last question, and we'll give our candidates an opportunity to have a 2-minute closing statement. This one might give them maybe a little bit shy of a minute, so we don't run out of time for this question. So the question is, we will have the House majority, we'll have the governor's office, one of you gentlemen will be there. Unfortunately, as you know, the Senate's not up for re-election, so therefore they will be under the control of the DFL. We will continue to advance our conservative values and principles in the House and pass good legislation that reduces the size of government and the burden upon each and every one of us. What skill sets do each and one of you have that can assure that we advance our conservative cause and that the good bills in the House get passed into law?
Well, I'm going to return to a word I used earlier, and that is leadership, and another word that I believe I used earlier, which is relationships. And the fact is that what we have to do is get people to accept our vision and buy into the things that we believe in. And of course, when we win the governor's office and when we take over the House, we will have sent a message to the Senate that maybe they ought to be careful about pushing their liberal policies that were not accepted by the people of Minnesota. And then again, so we've got to, we've got to also have the relationships in place. And while I have stuck very solidly to my principles and the things that I believe in, I would like to think that I've developed good relationships with Democrats, with people across the aisle. If I'm the governor and Tom Bach remains the majority leader of the Senate, I'll have to work with him. He and I have a good personal relationship and have a relationship with others. Folks, this is the relationship business, but I can't overstate the importance of being able to help people understand that your vision is the vision of Minnesotans and that this is what the people want and we ought to give it to them.
When we fix companies, we would start by changing the culture of the business and have everyone within the company focus on what results we want to get. And that's where I'd start in government. I'd start by focusing on what are the results that we're looking for and see if we can come to some agreement on how we want to improve those results. And when we fix those companies, we couldn't just dictate what we wanted done. We had to work with people to get the results that we wanted. We had to work with employees, with vendors, with customers, with lenders. And we had to convince them that the things that we thought made sense to do, that our vision for that business, are the right things to do. You can't get anything done if you don't get everyone working together with you. Those are the skills that I'll bring to working with the Democrat-controlled Senate to make sure that we get the results that we want to get.
You start by being a uniter versus a divider. Mark Dayton and Barack Obama have made their political careers about dividing one Minnesotan or one American against each other. You start with the idea that we're in this together. Do you believe that we should open up non-ferrous mining up in the Iron Range so that your kids can have a job up there, so that a spin-off company can start up in Minnetonka, in Plymouth, in Blaine? Yeah, I do. Do you believe that every kid in this state should have the opportunity to go to the best quality school, have a teacher that is the best educated and held accountable if he or she isn't up to the job? Yes, I do. You start with those things that unite us, not what divides us. Mark Dayton and Barack Obama have made a political life. As a community organizer, I disagree, it's a community divider. You believe in the things that we as Minnesotans believe and hold dear. That's how you unite Minnesotans behind us. And those are conservative principles. What built our great country is what will bring us together and will get Republicans and Democrats to vote for me next fall.
Joe, you mentioned what I mention a lot when I'm speaking to Republican groups. We can't afford to have a governor who just slows down what the Democrats do, because that's sometimes what we have done as Republicans. We can't continue to grow the size and scope and power of government. We need to change the direction. And we know we're going to have a DFL Senate. So it comes down to focus. If I have 12 or 15 different priorities of difficult things I want to change in the DFL Senate, I'm probably not going to have much luck. What we need to do is pick the one to start with and get it done. So for example, if it's the achievement gap and some difficult policies that we're going to have some pushback from, you go into the Senate and you find those Democrats that agree with you on that one single issue. And there are a bunch of them in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They're willing to take on the teachers union if somebody backs them up and shows some leadership. And you get that one thing done. That's how the liberals do it. They get one thing done at a time and they keep growing it. And that's what I would do as governor.
Very good, thank you. Well, we have time now for your closing statements. And Mr. Scott, you will go first. However, you did not take your 2 minutes, your extra minute longer for the questions, so I'll have the luxury of deciding that if you would like to take an extra minute, you certainly are granted. Well, let's start with your closing.
Well, actually, in all fairness, I think I just didn't quite call it out as 2 minutes, so just to stay fair here, I'll make sure that no one gets after me later on that one.
And feel free to come out in the middle if you'd like for your closing. I think that'd be appropriate.
Good idea. I'm not a politician, and business is not government, but I think there are real parallels. When we fixed those companies, we had to start by creating a vision. We then had to recruit a team, create a plan, and to motivate the team, both at the executive level and the employees, to focus on the results that we all wanted to achieve. Those are exactly the skills that are needed here in St. Paul. I want to be a transformational governor. I'm not looking for a political career. I want to do the job and then move on. But there are major problems in this state that need to be solved. And I know that I have the leadership experience. I know how to look under the covers and figure out what's going on and create the solutions to solve the problems, to take the best practices that are being implemented by 30 Republican governors around this country, that have been developed and articulated by good, thoughtful leaders in this state, but not yet implemented, and take the best ideas out there to put the state back on track. I'm going to spend my time between now and the election touring the state and listening. I spent the summer doing that. I heard a lot of great things from folks. I heard enthusiasm for me as an outsider, someone who's not a career politician, bringing fresh ideas. We'll continue to develop that enthusiasm. We'll make sure that we've got the state working together, that we communicate this smart vision of how we create job and economic growth here in the state, how we overhaul education, how we bring fiscal responsibility back to the state of Minnesota. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. Appreciate you having me here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. You may be able to be speaker someday too. I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'd like to ask you, please, to look at me not as a guy running against three of my friends. Scott's an exceptional businessman who's made a great career in business. Dave is a super senator in the Minnesota Senate, a guy, a principal, and a great radio show host. And Jeff is one of the most principled people I've ever met in politics, somebody who I looked to when I was a freshman as a mentor. That's not who I want you to see me running against. I want you to look at me as the guy who's going to run against Mark Dayton, who's going to bring Minnesotans together on issues that we not only believe in as Republicans and as conservatives, but as Americans. Again, do we want a career for all Minnesotans? Do we want a job for our kids to come back to, or do we want them to come back to a career? Do we want them to stay in Minnesota because they know there will be an economic opportunity there for them to not only work for a great company, but spin off and start their own company? You want a place where educational excellence, a focus on the hard sciences, math, physics, geometry, so that the 3 M's can actually come back. It won't just be Minnesota, it'll be mining and manufacturing. Is that what we want? We need to have somebody who can draw that clear contrast. As I mentioned in almost every one of my answers tonight, how Mark Dayton is the exact opposite of what I am. A middle-class dad, a very humble upbringing. I'm proud of my state. I love my wife. I love my 2 kids. I love the state of Minnesota. That kind of affection for our state and for our fellow Minnesotans is what will get us votes next fall. Mark Dayton is out to divide us against each other. If you're rich, we don't like you. If you're successful, we don't like you. Calls successful businessmen, people who are trying to avoid taxation. I want to not only be proud of our business women and men, but I want to show them that affection and make sure that they then spread the message and bring more businesses into our state. I'm asking you to look at me as a candidate who will draw that best contrast between myself and Mark Dayton, a proven leader who can not only deliver on a budget, but who stood up to Mark Dayton when he said, you will raise taxes. I said, we will not. We stopped the government from raising their taxes. We held Minnesota in check. Because of it, we have a $5 billion deficit is now a $3 billion surplus. I ask for your vote. I thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. We appreciate your support.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Ernie and his team, and to Joe and our panelists. I just really appreciate it. As the minority party in this state, in order for us to win next year, we've got to convince non-Republicans to vote for us. And we do that by inspiring them. Martin Luther King might have had a strategic plan, but he never talked about it. He talked about his dream because it inspired people, and people followed him because of that. Our candidate has to show that inspiration, has to show that vision to Minnesotans. Here's my vision that I will share with Minnesotans. I have a vision of a state where every kid in Minnesota has the opportunity to go to a great school. Not most of our kids, not almost all of our kids, but every single kid. And a vision of a state where patients and doctors are making decisions about health care, and not government, not bureaucrats, and not politicians or insurance companies. It's a state where the principles of economic freedom and individual liberty and equal opportunity and personal responsibility are trumping what seems to be an obsession with government involvement in everything at the Capitol right now. It's a vision of a state where the most vulnerable among us are safe and secure, and we actually treat them with dignity, not by herding them into another government program because it makes us feel good and it often doesn't work for them, but because we're figuring out ways to give them access to that same private marketplace that we all get to be in, so that they're walking with us at the same level rather than at some level below us. And most importantly, it's a vision of a state where over in St. Paul, we're not constantly thinking about how to grow government, how to make government bigger and more powerful and more intrusive. But we're trying to figure out ways to really cultivate that entrepreneurial, creative spirit of individuals to grow our economy and make us all more prosperous and happier. That's the vision that I've been sharing with Minnesotans and will be for the next year and 2 months. It's the reason I'm running for governor, and I'd love your support. Thank you all so much.
Well, you know, since I got into this on June 26th, I've been typically asked 2 questions almost every time I've been out. One is, what made you decide to do this? And the other is, what made you decide to do this? So let me answer the second one first. Because let's be honest about it, folks. There's been some despair among us since 2012. I think there's a feeling that the conservative movement was permanently set back. But I happen to be old enough to remember 1976 when Jimmy Carter was elected president, and it seemed as though all the strides for conservatism that Barry Goldwater had made in his 1964 courageous run had been lost. But after 4 years of feckless leadership, sound familiar? We got Ronald Reagan. There's always another election. Thomas Jefferson said the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So we need to be eternally vigilant, get out and work hard and do the things we need to do to give us that majority in the House and to win the governor's office. Now in answer to the question of why did I decide to do this? Well, it's because I care deeply about my state. And I care deeply about my country. I've lived in this state all my life. I'd like to think I understand Minnesotans, and I've had an opportunity to do many different things and meet all kinds of different people in different parts of the state, employees and employers and folks that have worked in public service and folks that have never worked in public service. And I love the people here. We have tremendous resources, and we have an opportunity to provide a future for my son down here, my daughter, and all of your children and grandchildren that is grander than the life that we've experienced. But right now we've got a group of people in office with the wrong worldview. They believe that government should be the center of activity. We believe the individual ought to be the center of activity. So going into government with that philosophy, what I will do is reduce our regulation, minimize the impact of regulatory agencies, lower our taxes, and create a tax structure that doesn't dictate people's behavior but simply funds our government, creates a transportation system that makes commerce work for us. I humbly ask for your vote. As I indicated, I will abide by your endorsement. I thank you for coming out tonight. It's been a great evening. Thanks for those who put this event on. I look forward to shaking hands and talking to you once we're done. Thank you.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause for your great questions. And for Ernie and Frank and all his team, their team that put this together, thank you. And for Vince, the president, the chairman of the Republican Party. And lastly, another round of applause for these gentlemen up here. They have a very hard task ahead of them. To run for a state office is a huge sacrifice. And I have come to know all of them up here, and I know that it's not for selfish reasons. It's for they believe they can do best for the state, for not only their family and their businesses, but yours and mine as well. And it's a huge sacrifice. So keep them in your prayers, help them, support them, and let's win the election in 2014. Thank you, folks, and God bless.